Tired of questionable seafood leaving a bad taste in your mouth? Don't worry. If you steer clear of a few common missteps, you might not feel the need to chase the real thing nearly as often. At first glance, imitation crab and real crab might seem like close substitutes, but they're actually quite different. Imitation crab is typically made from surimi, a processed fish paste whose name literally means ground meat in Japanese. It's often jokingly called the hot dog of the sea because of how it's produced and the range of additives involved. Like hot dogs, it has its place in cooking, but it doesn't match real crab in taste, texture, nutrition, or overall composition. Unless you're in a coastal area, you've probably seen imitation crab used frequently in dishes like seafood salads, casseroles, or sushi rolls. One issue is that it isn't always clearly identified on menus, which can be problematic for people with allergies to common surimi ingredients. The key takeaway is simple. Always know what kind of crab you're actually eating. A lot of people still cook imitation crab, but in most cases, it isn't strictly necessary. Like hot dogs or other fully processed products, imitation crab is typically cooked during manufacturing before it ever reaches the package. It's formed from surimi, then sealed and often pasteurized, a step designed to reduce harmful pathogens as long as it's stored and handled correctly. Food safety rules from the U.S. Food and Drug Administration lay out specific handling instructions depending on how the product is packaged and preserved. If it's labeled as frozen, for example, it should be thawed in the refrigerator and consumed according to the instructions on the packaging to maintain safety and quality. In most cases, that means imitation crab can be eaten cold straight from the package without additional cooking. Still, some people prefer to heat it anyway for texture or peace of mind, and that's perfectly fine as long as it's handled properly.
Honey, what's for dinner?
Because imitation crab is typically made from white fish like pollock, it's often assumed to be nutritionally similar to real crab. In reality, that comparison doesn't really hold up. While surimi-based products can still offer some protein, they aren't nearly as nutrient-dense as actual crab meat, and the processing involved usually means additional ingredients are included that further dilute the nutritional profile. If you compare it to something like Alaskan king crab, the overlap is fairly limited, mainly calories, phosphorus, and magnesium. Beyond that, the differences become more obvious. Real crab meat is significantly richer in key nutrients. For instance, a 3-ounce serving can provide very high levels of vitamin B12, along with meaningful amounts of copper, selenium, and zinc. Imitation crab, by contrast, contains only a fraction of those amounts and lacks nutrients like vitamin C, folate, and much of the omega-3 content found in real crab. On the ingredient side, surimi products may also include additives such as carrageenan, MSG, and phosphates, which some consumers prefer to limit. That said, the characteristic pink color usually comes from relatively common sources like paprika, beet extract, or carmine. And one minor advantage is that imitation crab generally contains less sodium than real crab, which may be a plus for some diets. Because fish is often considered a staple in low-carb or ketogenic diets, it's easy to assume imitation crab would fit the same pattern. While the calorie counts of real crab and imitation crab can look similar on paper, the way those calories are made up is quite different. In Alaskan king crab, most of the energy comes from protein. With surimi-based imitation crab, however, a significant portion of the calories can come from carbohydrates instead. Those carbs largely come from added fillers used during processing. Depending on the brand, ingredients like wheat, corn, potato starch, or tapioca starch are commonly used to help bind the mixture, improve texture, and stabilize it through freezing and thawing. Some products may also include small amounts of sugar or sugar alcohols like sorbitol to enhance flavor and maintain consistency. These additions help with manufacturing efficiency and texture, but they also shift the nutritional balance compared to real crab.
All right, everyone, chill.
A useful general guideline with imitation crab is to avoid unnecessary temperature changes. Since the product is already cooked and packaged with specific texture and moisture levels in mind, how you store it matters for maintaining quality. If you purchase it from the refrigerated section, it's best to keep it refrigerated and use it by the printed date. If it comes from the frozen aisle, it should stay frozen until you're ready to thaw it. Switching between the two, like freezing a refrigerated pack to extend its life, can often alter the texture and flavor once it's thawed again. So, while it's fairly forgiving from a safety standpoint when handled properly, imitation crab tends to hold up best when you stick to the storage method it was originally intended for.
Very nice.
If you do end up freezing imitation crab that was originally sold refrigerated, there are a few ways to minimize the impact on texture and flavor. One of the simplest is to let it thaw slowly in the refrigerator overnight, rather than at room temperature, which can help it defrost more evenly. You'll also tend to notice the changes less if you use it in cooked or heavily mixed dishes, things like crab casseroles or crab cakes, where other ingredients and seasoning mask subtle differences in texture. Recipes like crab dip are similarly forgiving, since the crab is blended with creamy or flavorful components. By contrast, colder, more delicate preparations such as salads or sushi tend to highlight any texture or moisture changes more noticeably. A common mistake with imitation crab is treating it like something that needs to be cooked from scratch, when really it only needs gentle reheating. Since it's already fully cooked during processing, the goal is simply to warm it through without damaging its texture. On the stovetop, a covered pan with a small splash of water or broth on low heat works well. Just enough steam to warm it without drying it out. Steaming is another reliable option, usually taking only a few minutes to bring it up to temperature. The microwave can work too, but it's easier to overdo it there. Using reduced power and short intervals helps prevent the texture from turning rubbery. For baked dishes or hot dips, it's best to treat imitation crab as a finishing ingredient rather than something that needs extended cooking. If it's part of a recipe that requires longer cooking times, like a stir-fry, it's better to add it near the end so it only heats briefly. Overcooking is what tends to cause the biggest drop in quality. It's important to be careful here. Being able to safely eat real crab doesn't automatically mean that imitation crab is safe for everyone. In fact, imitation crab can be risky for people with seafood or shellfish allergies because it isn't just one ingredient. It's a processed blend of multiple components. Under U.S. labeling rules from the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, packaged foods are required to list ingredients and disclose major allergens. Still, allergen-related labeling issues remain a leading cause of recalls, often when products fail to clearly state allergens or possible cross-contact with them. Imitation crab is usually made from pollock, but formulations vary widely. Some products may even include small amounts of real crab or other shellfish, and flavoring agents can sometimes introduce additional allergen risks. That's why reading labels carefully is especially important for anyone with seafood sensitivities. Beyond the base fish, surimi products often include starches, like wheat or corn, binders such as egg or soy protein, sugars, oils, salt, stabilizers, flavorings, and colorings. With so many ingredients involved, checking the full label is the safest way to understand what you're actually eating, especially if you have allergies or dietary restrictions. When it comes to imitation crab, it's worth paying close attention to where it was stored in the store, how it's packaged, and what the label actually says. Refrigerated and frozen versions aren't interchangeable, and packaging type, like vacuum-sealed versus loosely packed, can make a noticeable difference in shelf life. For example, refrigerated surimi that's been pasteurized and sealed in a vacuum package can often last for several weeks, or even up to a couple of months, depending on the use-by or sell-by date printed on the label. If you don't plan to use it before that date, freezing it before opening is usually the safest way to extend its life. Once the package is opened, however, the clock moves much faster. In most cases, it's best to use it within a few days, typically around 3, before quality and safety begin to decline.
Tick-tock. Tick-tock indeed.
If refrigerated surimi isn't vacuum sealed, it's best to treat it more like fresh seafood and use it quickly, typically within about 3 days of purchase, or by the use-by date printed on the packaging, whichever comes first. Frozen imitation crab, on the other hand, has a much longer shelf life and can generally be stored safely for an extended period. That said, quality tends to decline over time, often becoming noticeable after around 10 to 12 months in the freezer. Any best-by date on frozen surimi is usually meant to indicate peak quality rather than strict food safety, assuming it has been stored properly throughout. You should never eat imitation crab if it shows clear signs of spoilage. Fortunately, it's usually pretty easy to spot when it's gone bad. Texture changes like sliminess, an off or sour taste, or a noticeably unpleasant smell are all strong warning signs. Fresh surimi typically has only a very mild odor. When it begins to spoil, however, it can develop a stronger, fishy smell that becomes increasingly noticeable over time. This is tied to natural chemical changes in the fish used to make it. In particular, compounds in it can break down after the fish dies, forming trimethylamine, which is responsible for that characteristic strong fishy odor. While pasteurization and vacuum sealing help slow down bacterial growth, the protection isn't permanent. Once the package is opened and exposed to air, bacteria can begin to grow again. So if a newly opened package already smells strongly off or unpleasant, that's a sign it may have been compromised and is best avoided. It's easy to overlook the environmental side of seafood choices, especially with processed products like imitation crab. The primary fish used in surimi production is often pollock, which in some regions is not considered overfished, though stock status can vary by area and management zone. Even when target stocks are relatively stable, the fishing methods used can still have broader ecological impacts. For example, some pollock fisheries involve large-scale netting operations that can unintentionally catch non-target species, including marine mammals, and can also disturb seabed habitats depending on the gear used. There are also environmental considerations on the processing side. Turning pollock into surimi requires repeated washing steps to refine texture, flavor, and color. That process generates significant wastewater, which must be treated before it can be safely discharged, adding another layer of environmental management for producers. Overall, while imitation crab is often viewed as a lower-impact alternative to some seafood options, it still carries environmental trade-offs worth being aware of when making purchasing decisions.